Hey there folks, so welcome to Spectrum Pulse. We talk about music, movies, art, and culture. And today we're going to be talking about the newest album from Nicole Atkins called Goodnight Rhonda. If you're going to try describing Nicole Atkins in one sentence, even coming in before this album, look, I'm not even sure if it's possible. I tried to put together an easy explanation a number of times for this review, and it never really coalesced beyond Nick Cave, except a woman with more southern gothic country style and sultry grooves, or maybe Patsy Cline if she was a little bit more unstable and weird, and even then it feels inadequate. When she broke onto the scene with her debut album Neptune City, it sounded like she had grabbed a set of old Roy Orbison sounds and fitted with an indie country sound that wouldn't materialize properly for at least 5 years. It's no surprise at all that her major label Columbia had no real idea what to do with it, so her second record came on an indie label minus her backing band and her longtime boyfriend. And it made some sense. It was a nastier, scuzzier record. But at the same time, I would say that that second album, Mondo Amor, was a less catchy or solid project compared with her debut, and I couldn't help but feel like her vocals could carry much more pomp and presence than that record properly allowed to express. It was a little bit too scuzzy to match with her. So fast forward to 2014 and Slow Phaser, if anything, it was even harder to describe. Part 70s progressive rock tones and unconventional melodies, coupled with more prominent indie country touches and a ragged blend of gothic glam that had more in common with, again, Nick Cave or maybe even Meatloaf than anything in prog rock or country. It was an utterly unique project that I really did like, even if I could trace the obvious inspiration for those thicker 70s inspired grooves and tones. Basically, what Slow Phaser represented for Nicole Atkins, Real would represent for Lydia Loveless 2 years later, because the parallels are stark, and I mean that as high praise. And as such, I had no real idea what Goodnight Rhonda could represent for her, especially as Slow Phaser really didn't make any money for her, and she was nearing her lowest point, partially fueled by alcohol abuse, and yet funded through Pledge Music and recorded with contributions from both the Bad Seeds and other Nashville veterans, looking to pivot towards a little bit more soul or Muscle Shoals sound. This could very well be the sort of record that could put Atkins out of a nosedive while facing those demons head on. So okay, what did we hear on Goodnight Rhonda? Well, honestly, I wish I liked this a lot more than I do. And again, I think part of this is my own fault for having listened to so much retro-leaning indie country as I have. Because while the tones on Goodnight Rhonda are certainly agreeable, they're very potent, if I'm going to compare them to the Baroque stylings of Neptune City or the big experimental risks of Slow Phaser, to see her pivot towards a Muscle Shoals-inspired country soul sound, well, again, it's not bad, it's certainly likable and agreeable, but it's very familiar to me, and it doesn't quite reflect the experimentation that made those earlier albums so distinctive. In other words, while I think this is a good record for her, it's not quite at the level on which I know she's capable of. Now again, that's not saying what Nicole Atkins is doing here is bad. When she's been told that she's got a natural voice for this sort of sound, those people were not lying. And she's got the dramatic range and the pipes to go from songs where she's belting full-throated or to borderline spoken word whispering. And again, if you're gonna ever be seeking out a Nicole Atkins record, her voice, her charisma, her emotive presence, that would be the top of your list of reasons to do so. The problem is that she's moving into an increasingly crowded space when it comes to indie country singers of huge voices and production that will opt to blend in country with more soulful tones and a more rollicking Muscle Shoals sound. And it's hard for me to not immediately sketch out some parallels to artists with a very similar sound. Hell, if you give Angel Olsen a horn section and slightly tighter song structures with a little bit more groove, the reverb heavy liquid production on this album in particular, that's not that far removed here. Now again, I like a lot of these tones, particularly the distant pedal steel that echoes to add some phenomenal atmosphere. It's definitely Atkins' most country sounding album to this date, and I can see that winning over some in the indie set for sure, but at the same time, if I'm looking for the production and the compositional innovations that made Slow Phaser such a diverse, potent, and really underappreciated album, it's not always as apparent in some of these structures. I definitely like the minor piano chords, the sharper groove, and the organ behind Listen Up, or how the piano and violin play counterpoint to each other on Colors, or how the shattered horn layers behind I Love Living Here Even When I Don't, or the slightly sharper live feel of A Dream Without Pain that brings together this rawness that I wish I had heard across more of this album. But then you have the melody pulling that's seemingly from Amy Winehouse's Valerie on Sleepwalking, where the horn production feels really clumsily blended, or the oddly clipped electric melody on If I Could, even even if I did like the more spacious guitar tones on the outro. And yeah, I do appreciate some of the jazzier elements that play into Darkness Falls So Quiet and Broken Down Luck, with the pianos and the broader horns working pretty well opposite all the strings there, but I'm left feeling that a certain element of greater bombast and grandeur just isn't coming through that really put her earlier albums over the top for me. Now granted, that might actually be part of the point, which takes us to the lyrics and the themes of this project. And as I said earlier, this record is Nicole Atkins diving headfirst into facing her own demons, and the lingering, numb haze that has come in a lot of their wake. And while the opening tracks are set up some heartbreak and loneliness and finding solace in her own music, to say nothing of the mixed, very painful blessing of having to learn from some of these mistakes that comes up, the more personal alter ego comes in the alcohol abuse, which manifests itself as the titular character that Atkins knows that she probably should have outgrown by now, but now has to constantly rope back in line. But it's this character that gives the record really a lot of its dramatic weight, from the glittery, faded melancholy of colors in every reflected bottle, to the shattered dignity that she tries to hold together in a city full of neon lights on I Love Living Here Even When I Don't, where everyone is playing that character and that veneer, it's constantly on the verge of cracking and revealing something darker beneath it. It's no surprise that Sleepwalking plays out the way it does, going through the motions in a world that she used to dream in, reflecting a lingering pain of rejection in the music industry and a lifetime of facing that sort of failure when it's particularly unearned. It's what gives the final two songs on this album such real punch, with a night of serious drinking confronting the failed relationship that never could have worked at the root of some of that drinking, followed by a moment where she just wishes she could trace and find a dream without pain, mirroring much of the lessons that she had to face stridently on Listen Up that still weigh pretty heavily upon her. So yeah, solid thematic grounding, and while there are some moments that can feel a tad listless or underwritten, I think some of my larger issues here come in some of the details. Yes, I understand this is intended as a more raw, personal project where that sort of directness is indeed a strength, and Soul, it can work by going a little bit broader, it fits the writing style, but if I go back to some of the more layered metaphors on previous projects, a little bit more storytelling there, I feel like a slightly better balance could have been struck, or maybe the stories pick up a little bit more detail to really stand out from the crowd, beyond motifs that really don't evolve as much as they should beyond their first mention on this record. A lot of the colors of bottles, that really is one that stands out to me in that regard. It could have done more with that. But look, at the end of the day, I feel a little like I'm nitpicking here. I could comment on how I think that the cymbals are a little bit loud on a few songs, and overall I wish the record had a little bit more diversity and bombast and swell. But again, that's me nitpicking a project that clearly has some strong personal ties to Nicole Atkins as a musician and a songwriter. And while it is a more traditional, conventional art for indie country acts right now, there's enough unique personality, especially in the writing, to make it feel like more than just jumping on a bandwagon. As such, for me, very strong 7 out of 10 and a recommendation. But also with the acknowledgement that if you're less familiar with this brand of Muscle Shoals-inspired indie country soul crossover, you might find this a more unique experience, and I highly recommend you check it out if you haven't. I still think overall I might like Neptune City and Slow Phaser a little bit more, but regardless of that, definitely worth a listen. Check it out. So yeah, thanks a lot for watching. I'd like to like and subscribe, I'd be more than grateful. Bit of unique project I'm covering here. I was a little bit surprised this got to my schedule as quickly as it did, but hey, it's worth talking about. You want to buy it? Links in the description below. And I got the poll up there. I'm curious where more Nicole Atkins fans will fall on this album, given again, she's pivoted wildly in terms of styles over the past 4 albums. So yeah, anything else I might be able to do to improve my presentation? I'm all ears. If you guys want to get involved in my scheduling process that certain other records can get up faster, link to my Patreon right there, where 3 times a week you guys get to vote on my schedule, and once a week you guys get to add records or even movies if you're in the higher tiers. More details right there, but till then, I'm Mark, you're watching Spectrum Pulse, and I'll see you next time.